So the class is being recorded. So good evening, everyone. This is me again, Dr. Sameh, and this is A100A. And this is the second class that we have on Plato, right? Chapter 2 of Book 2. And Book 2, if you still remember, is Tradition and Dissent. We spoke enough about what the title means, so I'm not going to revisit the ideas that I addressed last time about the unit, about the book and the philosophy of the book, and why we're having the chapters and the arrangement that we have. So we're going to cut to the chase and go to the chapter right away. So let me share the book. So the book is being shared. Can you see that?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, interesting. Yes. Very quickly. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover or go back to the areas that I finished. Perhaps I can skim through them very quickly. Just a kind of refresher. Remember, this chapter is about philosophy, and philosophy is a big thing. It's with philosophy, you need to think, you need to use your mind, you need not to take ideas for granted. Taking ideas for granted means that you accept things as is, without questioning, without challenging, and this is obviously what not that chapter is promoting. The chapter is promoting thinking and thinking deeply about stuff, trying to uncover the rhetorical networks behind and under face value speeches and face value discourse. Again, our point of departure would be the idea of pitting tradition against philosophy, pitting moral tradition against thinking, and using our power of reason. In order to do just that, we're using philosophy, and in order to, and you cannot talk about philosophy unless, names like Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle come to mind or pop up. So it's Plato and his ideas on tradition and belief. And I told you, when I say philosophy and when I say philosophers, so we're talking about people who believe that nothing should escape our mind. You have to submit everything to your mind. Your mind is the only test. Okay? So you subject any and everything to your mind, and your mind decides whether it is acceptable or not. So Plato is doing just that with the idea of tradition and with the idea of moral tradition. Spoke about tradition, and we said those are sets of beliefs that we inherit from the old generation. Because of the fact that we honor the old generation, we accept those sets of beliefs and those sets of tradition as is. We never question them. We never challenge them. Okay, so if we don't challenge moral beliefs, if we don't challenge tradition, we are called moral traditionalists. Okay, So as moral traditionalists, we accept tradition as is, whether those sets of tradition are moral or any otherwise. So as a philosopher, Plato would have another um, approach. He says, "No, I don't have a problem, obviously, with tradition, but those sets of tradition have to go through. They have to stand the test of my mind. If my mind accepts them, if they make sense, I mean, logically, I would accept. If not, we need to perhaps reconsider having them around." Okay, so this is going to be the debate. This is a debate, and debate is an intellectual discussion. Intellectual means that people use their minds when they do stuff, when they do something. So we have a discussion, and this discussion is an intellectual one. Okay, so if you have a discussion, it means that you have more than one person, right? You normally have people asking questions and other people answering, and then those answering would ask questions, and those who ask questions would have to answer back. Okay, this is what discussions are all about, and this is what intellectual discussions are about. So who do we have in these discussions? We will have Socrates as one of the characters. We will have Nicias as another character, and we would have Laches. Okay, the part that we're doing is called Laches, and it's a name of one of the dialogues that Plato is famous for. Plato is a famous uh, philosopher, and Socrates is also a famous philosopher. Again, when I say philosophers, it means that they would use their own minds and their power of reason. So, of course, Socrates is older. He is the mentor of Plato. Mentor means that he is the teacher of Plato. Um, Two philosophers, but one of them didn't write anything. I mean, he would use his verbal powers. I mean, he would go around in markets and he would stop people and would ask them questions and then further question. This was Socrates. Plato, on the other hand, wrote so many things, and he is known for his dialogues. They are very famous and very popular because of his literary talent, the fact that together with being a philosopher, he was also a literary genius. He was a good writer. He would use metaphors, he would use figures of speech, and all those devices that can make the text come, um, you know, come alive, if you like. So we're doing actually two of the dialogues of Plato. One of them is called Laches, and the other is called Meno. With Laches, we're talking about courage and the nature of courage, and with Meno, we talk about knowledge and the nature of knowledge. Again, we spoke about Plato and Socrates, and we said that they used to live in Athens. And this was like 500 years before Common Era. And this was a time when Athens, where they hail from, where they come from, was a very advanced city-state. It had democracy, it had elected officials, and it was only natural that science and knowledge and technology and even literature were in full swing. They were flourishing at the time because of this atmosphere of freedom that everybody was enjoying. At one point, Athens would engage in a war with another city-state by the name of Sparta. And Sparta was a military dictatorship. And Sparta would defeat Athens eventually. And the Spartans would occupy Athens for 4 years. When the 4 years are over, when the Athenians defeat the Spartans and get rid of them and dismiss them out of the country, they would go back to their old life, and they start to kind of reconsider their stances and why what happened happened. And they would put Socrates on trial because they said that during those turmoils and wars that they had with Sparta, Socrates was a bad influence. They would try him and they would, kind of pronounce a death judgment on him. They would ask him to drink hemlock, which is a kind of poison, which he did. And he died this way. I mean, accused, of course, of being a corrupt influence on young people, and also on defaming and also trashing their gods. Okay, so Plato is going to try to immortalize his mentor Socrates in his work. So the Socrates that we have in Plato's dialogues is not the historical Socrates. He is a made-up figure or character. Why are we saying that? Because we don't want people to believe that Plato is presenting Socrates' philosophy. No, Plato has his own philosophy, and his philosophy is as genuine as it gets. So the reason why we're having Socrates, because Socrates at the time was very famous for his Socratic method. Socratic method, which is obviously based on the idea of asking questions and then asking further questions. So Plato is taking advantage of this method, and he's using it through Socrates, his invented character. So let's go to the part that so this is of course Plato. I did tell you that Plato comes from a very wealthy family, while Socrates came from a very poor family. Spoke about traditional beliefs, and we said that these are beliefs that are, inherited from the past, and that's why we say that they are traditional. And we hold them in great respect and great esteem because we inherit them from people that we love and appreciate, our grandparents and even beyond. So out of respect for them, we take whatever they say as is. We never stop and challenge what those sets of beliefs are. Is that good? Yeah, sometimes it is, but sometimes you would need to stop and think of why I'm practicing this kind of thing. Why don't I challenge it and see whether it is really good or bad? And so this is the idea that we now have of Plato. Plato is against moral beliefs, is against traditional moral beliefs, and he is obviously against them because they are inherited and they are not tested. They are taken as is. And as a philosopher, as a rationalist, as somebody who uses his mind, he wouldn't settle for that. He would say, we need to question those beliefs. And we spoke about why traditional moral beliefs have such popularity and such approval and acceptance among us um, in the modern times. Remember, they belong to the past. One interpretation would be the fact that we share those traditional moral beliefs, and they provide the cement that we would need in society. So when people share those beliefs and there is agreement on accepting them, so there is obviously harmony and symmetry among people. There is no discord, and obviously starting to question those traditional beliefs would bring in confusion and conflict. So in the interest of security, in the interest of harmony, we would keep those beliefs as is. We would believe in them and we would practice them. Again, another reason why we stick to those traditional moral beliefs would be the fact that they have a long history. And again, we inherited them from people that we trust. We never question the wisdom of those who have given us those beliefs. We are always under the impression that those beliefs are tried and tested, and they never went wrong. We don't give ourselves the chance to perhaps try them ourselves and see whether they would work or not. We don't reflect on what we inherit usually. Again, we have two groups. Remember, this is a debate or an intellectual discussion where you would have two sides to the argument. One side would be called the moral traditionalists, moral traditionalism, and the other side would be moral rationalists or moral rationalism. Okay, and they would be pitted against each other. They would compete over proving whether sticking to tradition is good or bad. So moral traditionalists would tell you that, of course, it would always be good to stick to traditions and never question them. Moral rationalists and moral rationalism would tell you, no, you have this power of reason. You were born with this amazing apparatus that we call the brain and the mind, and you would need to use it. Use it and check moral beliefs and see whether those moral beliefs are consistent with reason or not, are logical enough or not. So you would use your power of reason to see whether those beliefs can be defended rationally or not. Again, we spoke enough about Athens and what used to happen in Athens. We also spoke long and enough about Socrates and the historical Socrates and also the invented Socrates, and we stressed the fact that the Socrates that we have in Plato's Laches is the invented Socrates, is the Socrates that Plato made up to honor the historical Socrates. Um, Again, we stress the fact that Plato has his own philosophy, and the philosophy that Socrates is using here is not his own, it is Plato's. Plato is a formidable, is a very serious philosopher, and he has his own philosophy. This is Socrates, and you can always set him against Plato and see. Remember, Plato, we said that he was rich, he came from a rich family. Socrates, on the other hand, was poor and he came from a poor family. He never worked in his life. All he did in his life was to go about in markets, stop people, and then ask them philosophical questions. What is interesting about Socrates, whether in Laches or in Meno or any other, Platonic dialogues, would be the idea that Socrates asks questions, but he never answers them. So he asks you a question, and then you, to the best of your ability, try to come up with an answer. And then he says, no, this is not the answer that I want. And then he asks you another question, and then you come up with another answer, and he would tweak the question a little bit. When you so people who normally ask questions have the answer if you have the power, or if you are in a position to say this answer is correct and this answer is not, it means that you know the answer. So when they get fed up with the questioning of Socrates, they would tell him, okay, tell us the answer. And he, to this, he would simply say, unfortunately, I don't know the answer, which they take as very cheating, which they take as very deceitful. They would say, this guy is deceiving us. He knows the answers, but he wouldn't share them with us. Again, is that what Plato is trying to paint or portray here? Is he bringing in Socrates to honor or to dishonor him? Obviously, he is bringing in Socrates to honor him. He wouldn't agree with people who believe that Socrates was deceiving people by not answering, by keeping the answer to himself. We'll talk about this part in a minute. The idea whether Socrates is deceitful or this is part of his method. So again, this is puzzling and confusing. People get irritated by this serial questioner that we call Socrates. But it doesn't seem likely that Plato intended to portray Socrates as guilty of deliberate deceit. No. So obviously, there is a reason, and we're going to find all about it later. Okay, so and now we're starting Laches, the dialogue that we call Laches. And it was all sparked or started off when two gentlemen from Athens were discussing the future of their boys or sons. They wanted to educate their sons. They are thinking of the best way they can educate their sons. What is it that they want their sons to acquire eventually? It would be the idea of self-discipline and also courage. So how can they get there? How can their sons be courageous and self-disciplined? This is what they are arguing and discussing. They want to see which style of learning can help secure courage and secure self-discipline for their kids. Okay, so if it's about self-discipline and if it's about courage, then they would, no people, they wouldn't find better people than people who used to work in the military, because the military is about courage, of course, and the military is also about discipline, right? So they would bring in Nicias and Laches, who were generals in the Athenian army. They would bring them in and they would ask their advice as how to educate their kids. And this is where Nicias and Laches are going to be engaged in the conversation. They will, venture and come up with conclusions as what is the best way to teach these kids courage and self-discipline. And at one point, they seem to disagree. And in this case, Laches would ask Socrates to come in and contribute input to the conversation. And this is where Socrates will take over, and he's going to be asking questions and actually moderating the whole conversation. So now we don't have Lysimachus and Melesius anymore. We now have Nicias and Laches, and we have Socrates introduced to the conversation. So like I said, Socrates is a philosopher, and he would take over the conversation and the argument, and he will even moderate it. When they ask him about the best way to educate these kids, he would say, obviously you're missing the point. You need to ask questions of a more general nature. So instead of talking about fighting in armor, instead of talking about taking the kids to this or that kind of education and this and that kind of school, we need to talk about more general ideas, so that the judgment that we're going to make would be general, and it would apply not only to these kids, it would also apply to all the kids. He said that if we're talking about fighting in armor as one possible course, we would ask a more general question about courage. What is courage? And Socrates would ask Laches to come up with a definition of courage. What courage is according to Laches. Laches is going to think for a while, and then we'll come back with an answer. So Socrates suggests, yeah, go ahead.
Laches and Nicias are real figures?
Are military. They are military figures. They were generals in the Athenian army. That's why the parents of the kids are asking them, because they have experience with the military. They wanted them to learn self-discipline, and to also be courageous. So these are qualities that you normally find in the military, in the army, right?
Yes.
So Nicias and Laches are going to discuss the matter, but they don't seem to agree. Okay, in this case, Laches will ask Socrates to come over in order to also give advice. So Socrates, typical of a philosopher, will turn the tables upside down. And instead of giving a simple answer, he would ask questions, which is typical of Socrates. So instead of giving them a very straightforward answer, he would tell them, listen, we need to start all over. We need to start with a general definition. What is virtue? And by the way, the word virtue here means courage. We need to define what courage or virtue is. Okay, so like I said, Laches is going to attempt an answer. And from Laches' answer, we get to know, typical of his experience as a military general, of course, he would focus on the idea of, of practical courage. He would focus on the military. He would give examples of infantry people and what they do whenever there is a battle. The fact that they stand their ground. So the enemy is fighting them. The enemy is advancing, but they stand their ground. They never retreat. They never go back. Okay, so this is what Laches consider as courage and courageous. So obviously, this is a specific example that Socrates wouldn't agree with. Socrates is going to also tell Laches that you're focusing your attention on the military. Does it mean that we don't have courageous acts and courageous examples outside the military with civilians? So uh, if Laches says, of course, there are examples outside the battlefield, he would tell him that your definition of courage is not correct. See, he allows him to speak his mind, to come up with an answer, and then he starts to find faults with the answer. He doesn't prevent you from saying whatever you have. Okay, but after you finish, he starts to kind of question what you said. So Laches has answered Socrates' question by presenting a specific example of courage. Okay, so his answer leaves out many other examples of courageous behavior, both on and off the field of battle. So the focus with Laches is on the field of battle, and life, there is obviously more to life than the battlefield. Don't you agree? If I ask you about courage and you only give me examples of courage in the military, in the battlefield, in wars, obviously this is going to be this is not going to be a complete definition, because there is this substantial part of our life that we spend off the battlefield. Our life is not all in the battlefield, right? Don't you agree?
Okay.
Yeah, so Socrates, in this sense, would tell Laches that your example is very specific and your answer should be more general than that. It should encompass, examples of the battlefield and also outside the battlefield. So what Socrates is doing is what any philosopher would do. Philosophy is typically concerned with questions of a very general kind. Okay, so what inspired Laches and what inspired his answer? Obviously, Laches, when he answered the answer that he answered, which was specific and focused on the military, Laches was reflecting the tradition of the time. If you ask anybody, other than Laches, any other Greek about the definition or to give you a definition of the word courage, he would come up with the same definition because this is the traditional definition of courage. And this is actually what Plato and Socrates are fighting. This idea of tradition, this idea of accepting things as is. Even definitions are inherited. If I ask you about something, you would tell, and then I ask you and ask another person from the same culture about the same thing, they would give me the same answer because they share the same tradition and they seem to follow the same, to be willingly following the same tradition. So the answer that Laches gives to Socrates' question reflects traditional Greek views about the nature of courage. So this is actually what is required of citizen soldiers fighting in defense of the city. They expect them to stand their ground and never to retreat. And we have a fine example of that. There was this sector, military sector in the Athenian army, and it's called Hoplites. And those Hoplites were heavily armed soldiers who would fight in rows. They would stand in rows, and in which each man's shield protected not only his own left side, but also the right side of the soldier standing next to him. So they go together, they move forward together. And in this case, they stand their ground. This standing their ground and not wavering, not retreating. Retreating would be a sign of courage, of course. So this was regarded as a paradigm of courage. Again, so Socrates would disagree and he would ask Laches to move beyond what was then the traditional concept of courage. Traditional. He is against tradition. Okay, so Laches would go back and try to think long and deep, and then he would come back with another definition for courage. And he would say that courage is endurance. Endurance means fortitude, the ability to endure something, the ability to stand things. تحمل, قوة التحمل. So this is the second definition that Laches produces. He suggests that courage is endurance. Well, Socrates would say, yeah, this is a very good definition. I like your definition. But he would follow that with a series of questions. And he would say, don't you think that there is also that courage is not only about endurance? We can include other elements. He would say yes. He would also tell them don't you think that we also have foolish endurance? Sometimes you endure stuff for nothing. Okay. Sometimes, and this is obviously futile. If you, let me give you an example. For example, you work in a company, um, and you have what we call a dead-end job. You don't like your boss, and your boss is exercising all types of pressure on you, and there is obviously no prospect or future for the job, and you are enduring and enduring and you don't you think that this is foolish endurance because there are no prospects, because nothing is going to change? Don't you think that trying your luck somewhere else is better, is even smarter? What do you think?
It could be.
Yeah, let me give you another example. Somebody is doing perhaps IT, and he or she is not mathematically inclined, and there are so many courses that have a math or a mathematical component to them, but he or she is enduring. I mean, he fails a course and then passes another, and then fails a course and then passes another. Don't you think that this is, yeah, this is endurance, it is true, but don't you think that this is foolish endurance, because this may cost him years and years until he or she graduates?
Yes.
Yeah, it is endurance, but it's misdirected, obviously. He or she could spend his time doing something else, right? Okay. So this is the problem with Laches' second definition, that it is true that courage can be endurance, but there is an aspect that he misses, which is the idea of foolish endurance. And obviously, foolish endurance does not amount to courage. Um, with the second definition, Socrates is going to start using logical arguments. And logical arguments are, you know, this logical format that you use in order to convince somebody of something, in order to attack the argument of somebody, but in a logical way. So there is a logical format that people use whenever they engage in debate, where you normally have what we call claims, and those claims make way to a conclusion or lead to or result in a conclusion. In logic, law and mantiq, we call the claims, we call them premises. Okay, and those premises, they are normally two, and they would lead to a conclusion. Okay, what do we call them in Arabic? In Arabic, we call the premises muqaddimat. Okay, and we call the conclusion natija. Okay, so in order for you to arrive at a correct or a sound conclusion, you have to have good claims, right? You have to have good premises. And we have an example where we are trying to defeat the argument of Laches. Laches is saying that that foolish endurance is courage. Okay, so this is the argument. I would like you to read it. You have premise one and you have premise two, and they would lead to the conclusion. So premise one would say, courage is an admirable thing. Admirable means something that you admire. And premise two, foolish endurance is not an admirable thing. Nobody likes foolish endurance. And the conclusion would be, so foolish endurance is not a kind of courage. So you start off with premises, and if the premises are good enough, they can lead to a good conclusion. Are you getting the idea?
Yes, it's clear. Yes.
Okay. So as you can see, we engage in steps, and those steps are scientific and are logical. Okay, so the more logical they are, the more sound the conclusion. So how can we paraphrase this argument that we have? This is how we paraphrase. This is what this is a reconstruction of what Socrates may have said. He said, I am pretty sure, Laches, that you take courage to be an admirable thing. Okay, this is conclusion, this is premise one. And then he says, and he introduces premise two by saying, but what if endurance is coupled with foolishness? And then he goes to the conclusion. Would you say that it is an admirable thing then? He then introduced the conclusion saying, so you wouldn't agree that this kind of endurance is courage. Okay? So as you can see, with logical arguments, you normally use certain words. For example, in order to introduce the premises, you use words like because, words like since, after all. In order to introduce the conclusion, you would use words like so, therefore, as a result. Okay, so is courage endurance? This is, by the way, is called deductive argumentation, where you normally start with the premises, or you start with specifics and you move on to conclusions, and the conclusions are normally general. You start with the specific and move on to the general. Okay, so the mark of deductive arguments is that it is supposed to be valid. So valid means that the premises are true, and if the premises are true, you can be sure that the conclusion is also true. And we have another example about this idea of validity. And validity, by the way, does not mean that the conclusions that you arrive at are truthful or are taken from life. You can have silly examples. Okay, with validity, we mean that the argument is technically correct. Okay, when I say, for example, this is another logical argument. When I say premise one, metal is good to eat. So premise two, gold is not good to eat. So conclusions, so gold is not a kind of metal. See? This applies to grammar, for example. Sometimes people write sentences that are grammatically correct, but they don't make sense. So you tell this individual that your sentence is correct, but it doesn't make sense. Okay, so again here, when I say that an argument is valid, so I'm saying that the premises are technically correct, but they may not have any relationship with reality. So this is validity. But we have another adjective that we use together with valid. We use the word sound. Sound has to do with reality. So sound arguments are arguments where the premises are true and the conclusion arrived at is also true. Okay.
Sorry,
So
doctor.
yes, go ahead.
Valid is connected with the promises only, but sound with the conclusion and promises, right?
Yeah, yes. When I use the word valid, I'm focusing on technicalities, on how technically correct the argument is. So the whatever the stuff of the premises are and whatever the stuff of the conclusion is. Like I told you, you can talk nonsense, but this nonsense can be technically valid. So the form of the argument is correct, is valid, but whatever is inside is not valid. And this is, by the way, is called aptly enough المنطق السوري. We call it in Arabic المنطق السوري. Suri, where we focus on the form, whether the form is valid and correct or not, regardless of the content. Are you getting the idea?
Yes.
Okay. So again, we're back to the idea of foolish endurance, and there is an example. So obviously the example that we are getting here is the example, I think it's from the book, not it's not Socrates example, where we have a firefighter, and this firefighter is foolish. At least this is how we see him. Maybe in another culture with a different set of expectations, this is not very foolish at all. So what's the example? The example that would prove to us that courage is not endurance, because it can have a foolish aspect to it. So consider the case of a firefighter who stays inside a blazing building at considerable personal risk in order to retrieve a minor piece of equipment. How should we describe this case? Can you imagine the scenario? So we have a firefighter, and there is a blazing building, a building that is set on fire. And this guy, or this, it can be a female firefighter, okay, also. He or she would walk into the fire, and when asked, why did you go inside? He said that I was trying to retrieve a piece of equipment. What do you think of that? Would you, as a firefighter, would you risk your own life for something as little as equipment, a piece of equipment? What do you think of this act?
Maybe the equipment is dangerous, so that's why he tried to
Yeah,
get it.
yeah, to minimize the risk. He's obviously, according to Taima, he's sacrificing himself so that the whole building wouldn't collapse. Okay, but remember, we're saying a minor piece of equipment here, Taima. So obviously, it's not explosive, as you may imagine. What do you think, Igama?
Oh, I think this is a foolish
Yeah,
decision.
yeah, it can be foolish, right? So this is the foolish aspect to it. The fact that you wouldn't risk your own life for a piece of equipment, even if it's expensive, even if it's right. So we have a number of opinions. One such opinion is that the firefighter is not being courageous. He's just foolish, and there is nothing admirable in that. Okay? The second opinion would be that the firefighter is being courageous, but there is nothing admirable about his or her courage because it's not being used to good effect. The third opinion would be that the firefighter is being courageous and his or her courage is admirable even though it is foolish. Where do you stand? Look at the three verdicts. Look at the three judgment. Which one would you subscribe to? Which one would you agree with?
The first one.
The first one, the firefighter is not being courageous, just foolish, and there is nothing admirable in what he did. Okay, do you all agree with Fatma? Are you Fatma? Ya Fatma? Are you Fatma?
Yes.
Okay, Fatma. Do you guys agree with Fatma?
Yes, I agree with here. Yes, exactly.
Okay, okay, that's right. And this is obviously what Socrates also agrees to. And this is what he is building the whole argument around. Okay, so now that we are done with Laches and his two definitions, remember his definitions are all of a practical nature. The first one was about standing your ground in the battlefield. The second definition was about enduring, and of course you have seen how Socrates defeated his two definitions. Now we move to Nicias, and Nicias is going to also define courage. So as you have seen, Laches's definition characterized courage as the ability to behave in a certain way. So it's about behavior. So it's about action. When you go to Nicias, we're going to see that he focuses on theory. He is more theoretical. He's not practical. He wouldn't talk about actually doing something as much as he would be talking about the knowledge about something. So again, Lache's definition characterized courage as the ability to behave in a certain way. So it was to stand firm in the face of danger or hardship, right? Nicias, on the other hand, would focus on the quality that he takes to underlie courageous behavior. That is a kind of wisdom or knowledge. So according to him, courage is knowledge, is wisdom. So with Nicias, the focus is with the ability to evaluate different outcomes as good or bad. Okay, so according to him, courage is not doing stuff as much as it is being able to assess situations and to come up with assessments and evaluations of something and see whether it's good or bad. Doing something would be good or would be bad. But you would know that something is good or something would be bad, but you stop short of acting on the knowledge. This is the problem that we have with Nicias, that it is true that he talks about the knowledge of something, but he stops there. He doesn't tell us that with the knowledge that we now have, we should move to the next level and act. He doesn't act. So, according to Nietzsche, courage is a matter of knowing the value of things. A courageous person will know whether or not it is worth sacrificing his or her life for the sake of a military victory, or whether it is worth risking wealth and reputation in order to defend a moral principle. He would know about that. He has the knowledge. Okay, but so you now have the knowledge. You know what is good and what is bad, that what is honorable and what is not, but you stop there. This is obviously the problem that we have with him. So again, the problem with Nietzsche would be that his definition would be regarded as a first step towards a complete account. So it's a first step. What is the second step? The second step obviously would be to act on the knowledge, on the wisdom that you have, but obviously he stops there. So according to Nietzsche, knowledge is all that is needed for courage. And this is obviously dangerous and wrong, right? One objection that might be made to this is that people sometimes know the best thing to do, but lack the willpower to do it, right? You know that perhaps somebody is in danger and you need to help him. So if you know that he is in danger, but you wouldn't act, so what is, I mean, wisdom is obviously nothing beneficial here if you cannot act on it. So you sometimes know the best thing to do, but lack the willpower to do it. And we have an example, a very interesting one. We have this situation where a woman sees a child trapped inside a burning house. She knows, she can see him or her. Okay, and suppose that the woman knows that the best thing she could do is to try to rescue the child, and she has the means and she can do it. Will she necessarily run into the flames? Okay, if she doesn't, what happens if she doesn't? So what benefit would we have? She can see the boy or the girl inside the burning house, and obviously she can have the time, she can have the means to go there and get him or her out. She knows, she's wise enough and everything, and she can calculate and assess the situation. But obviously if she doesn't act, we don't need this kind of knowledge. This kind of knowledge is useless. Walay, what do you think?
I agree with you.
Yes. So Nietzsche seems to be assuming that when people really know the best thing to do, they will necessarily act on that knowledge. He assumes, but he doesn't guarantee it. So if you cannot guarantee it, because this is not part of your definition, it's useless.
Sorry, doctor.
Yes, go ahead.
There's a girl that cannot attend the lecture. Please let her attend.
So what can I do? I mean, it's open. There is nothing I can do. I mean, unless you want me to say, Attendi ya Hamis. What's her name? I mean, it's open for everyone, right?
She sent on the WhatsApp group that she cannot join the lecture.
Perhaps she's joining another room or something. I don't know. Or another university. Let me check. What's her name? ما زال إيش أسوي يا ربي ما في أحد يقدر يساعدني. طب اسمها إيه؟ What's her name? I don't know what people normally do, but it's open. I mean, we don't have any restrictions. Yeah, ask her to try timeout. Wait. We don't even have requests. Ask her to send me a request. Anyway. Okay, so we're moving on with Nicias now. So is courage the whole of virtue? So what we, with Nicias, we're saying that knowledge, that the courage is knowledge and knowledge is courage, okay? But obviously he's not giving us the whole definition. The part that he's giving us is about knowing, is about having the knowledge about something, being able to assess a situation, but he stops there. He doesn't require that the knower is or should act on the knowledge. We move to another part where Nicias is involved, and it's also about, this is another question that Socrates is asking. Socrates develops a second objection to Nicias' definition of courage. He would tell him, don't you think that together with knowledge we would need other things like temperance, justice, and other good qualities? And he would say, yes, you're correct, you're right. There is obviously more to courage than just knowledge. He says, I rest my case. Okay, so if something is missing in the definition, Socrates would dismiss the definition and say, this is a corrupt definition. This is not the right definition. And then Nicias would tweak his definition a little bit and come up with another one. Courage for him is knowledge of what is fearful and what is encouraging. And then he would tweak it a little more by saying courage is knowledge of what will be evil and what will be good in future. And Socrates would stop him. Why are you talking about the future? It can be the future and it can be now. Don't you agree? I said, yes, that's correct. Okay, then your definition is wrong and corrupt. So it's not about the future, it's about just any time, right? So it's just about any situation, whether in the past, present, or in the future. So he's going to clip the definition and take off whatever is referring to the future by saying that courage is knowledge of what is evil and what is good. No future anymore. And then he would trim it down a little bit until we arrive at the conclusion that courage is just a part of virtue, not the whole virtue. Okay, and then we move to another idea, which is knowledge and opinion. Okay, so we arrived at the idea that knowledge can be part of virtue or courage. How about opinion? And with this idea of knowledge and opinion, we're moving from Laches, the dialogue, to Minu, which is another dialogue. With this other dialogue, we have Minu as one of the characters, and we would have Socrates. Okay, so the dialogue's title is Minu, and it's a conversation with a young man who is described as being idle and vain, an idle and vain young aristocrat from Sicily in the north of Greece. They would sit and talk. And they would talk about knowledge, and they would talk about opinion, and they would talk about the difference, whether knowledge is better than opinion. Of course, knowledge is better than opinion, because opinion is normally inherited. Sometimes you inherit opinions. Sometimes you even have opinions of others. So knowledge is absolute. Let's look at the knowledge and opinion, and take the analogy of whatever is constant and whatever is valuable. Okay, ثابت ومتحرك. So knowledge is constant, ثابت. Okay, while opinion can vary, right? So obviously knowledge is more important. But don't we sometimes have true opinion? So you have this difference between opinion and true opinion. So true opinion would be also based on good knowledge. So Socrates suggests that knowledge is more valuable than opinion, and it can also be more valuable than true opinion. So Socrates would also suggest that knowledge and true opinion are equally reliable as guides to action. Okay. So this is one of the questions that Socrates asks. Can true opinion become knowledge? And he says, yes. True opinion can be knowledge by figuring out what makes them true. You ask why this opinion is true. If you can get to the bottom of this opinion can turn into knowledge. So it's about understanding why something functions, why something is true. Again, he's making this distinction between knowledge and true opinion. He would say that true opinion is fine and everything, but again, knowledge is more valuable. Why? According to him, opinions tend to stray. Stray means over time you can get lost with them. They can lead you astray. They can mislead you. And he's giving us the example of a particular argument. If a particular argument is valid, and you just take my word for it, I'm telling you that it is valid and everything, and you accept what I'm saying, without really understanding why I am saying what I am saying. In this situation, you could easily be persuaded by someone else that the argument is invalid. So if I tell you that something is bad and you accept my word for it without questioning, without asking me why, Dr. Sami, you think it is bad. Somebody else, perhaps with more words, can convince you that it is not bad after all. So with opinions, you are at a loss. You don't know whether to follow Samih or somebody else. Okay, but with knowledge, you know the knowledge. So knowledge is reliable while opinions are not. So people can sway you to their different directions if you don't ask why, if you don't understand why something is what it is.
دكتور.
Yes.
So the knowledge يعني ثابت على الأيام صح؟
This is what Socrates is saying. You may differ with Socrates, because now, I mean, science is about knowledge, and whatever we think is constant today may change tomorrow through experimentation and empirical science and everything. This is what Socrates said 2,000 years back, or perhaps more. Okay? But what he is saying about opinions is true and is still valid until today. The idea that if you take the opinions of others and embrace them and take them as your own without asking why I came up with those opinions, if you take them as is without asking for an explanation, when somebody else come over in a week, for example, he can also give you other opinions about the same case, and you would accept them. You wouldn't even remember what I told you. Okay, are you getting the idea? Hello. So Socrates here stresses the fact that that knowledge is not something that we can absorb unthinkingly from people around us. So people can give you a piece of knowledge, but you normally think about it, unlike opinions. You take opinions as is, but when it comes to knowledge, you would stop and think. So according to Socrates, you cannot come to know something by parroting someone else's words. And this is what he is warning us against. He's saying that you shouldn't be a parrot, barbaran, parroting the opinions of other people. You need to think of yourself, for yourself. And this is obviously the difference between knowledge and opinion. So parroting someone else will supply you at best with a correct opinion, while knowing from knowledge, while knowing something involves experiencing the truth of it for yourself. So opinion is ready-made, while knowledge and knowing is, you get knowledge the hard way. You need to look for it. You need to dig for it. And if you dig for it, you come up with the right conclusion, and you're not likely to forget about it. When somebody else comes and tries to persuade you otherwise, you would say, no, I did my homework, and this is knowledge, and this is what I take as true. Are you getting the idea?
Yes, doctor.
So many people would regard the testimony of other people, whether they are friends, teachers, experts, and eyewitnesses, as an important source of knowledge. Yeah, there is nothing wrong about that. But this is, according to Plato and Socrates, is a source only of fleeting opinion. This is opinion. Okay. So I think we now can realize why Socrates was not trying to answer the questions. Now we come to the idea whether Socrates was deceitful or not. So obviously Socrates is not giving answers because he does not want people to take the answers which he forms, which are his opinions, and take them and parrot them and copy them and share them. Okay, because in this case they are mere opinions. He wants people to go and dig for the truth for themselves. If they can do that, they wouldn't get opinion, they would get knowledge. And according to him, knowledge is, more important. So there is, when we started, we said that there is something very confusing about Plato's portrayal of Socrates. The fact that Socrates claims that he does not know how to answer his own questions, while at the same time appearing to favor particular answer. If you say this answer is good and this one is bad, it means that you know the answer. But Socrates would say, no, I don't know the answer. So obviously Plato is not discrediting Socrates by presenting him as a liar. But perhaps Plato agrees with Socrates about this distinction between true opinion and knowledge. Again, it's about why. So Socrates would say, okay, I can give you an answer, but I don't know why I'm giving you this answer, because perhaps I'm going to be parroting and copying the opinion of others. But when you ask me why, I wouldn't tell you because I don't know, because I didn't experience the thing myself. That's why I stop, short of giving you answers. So Plato's view, in Plato's view, Socrates is right to deny that he knows the answers to his questions. So the aim, after all, was not to deceive people, but rather to entice them, to persuade them, to puzzle out what he means, to think deeply about what he says. So, like Socrates, Plato does not try to impart his opinions to other characters by delivering a lecture. So, Plato is not trying to give you his opinions in a very straightforward way. Plato could have written a book and he could have included all his views or opinions. No, rather than doing that, he formed this kind of fictional dialogue. He had this dialogue where we have fictional characters. We have Socrates and we have Nicias and Laches and Meno. So he meant it to go this way because this is how he wanted you to know what you know. And this is obviously, a style of teaching that Plato promotes. So instead of giving you a book and giving you the opinions straight ahead and in a very straightforward way, no, he would create a creative piece of writing where you have fictional characters pitted against each other, and out of the conversation and out of the encounter, you get the ideas. So this is a style of teaching that Plato likes. Instead of giving you everything right away in a very straightforward way, he would do it some other way. And in this case, he is very similar to Socrates. Socrates, the fiction, the historical Socrates never sat in a place and had people in front of him, and he started to give them classes and knowledge like I am doing now. So what I'm doing now is traditional. I'm giving you everything. I'm explaining everything. This is a traditional way that neither Plato nor Socrates would approve of. They wouldn't like this style. Okay, if they are the ones who are giving you the class today, they would ask you questions and ask you to go and check and inquire and then come back. And then when you come back with answers, they would ask you other questions. Okay, and of course they would engage with in the conversation with you. When they engage in the conversation with you, it would be hard for a passerby to come over and say, yeah, this is the teacher and this is the student and this is another student, because of the format of the class. It's not this this traditional. Let me give you an example. What do you think of this? This is our class, right? Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
This is a typical class where
Yes, like
I
what
am,
you do.
yeah, I am in front. I'm giving you everything and you're receiving everything. Is that what Plato and Socrates have in mind?
No.
No.
Can you tell, yeah, let me ask you another. Can you tell where the teacher is and where the students are?
Yes.
The teacher
Is
on
it
the left.
clear enough?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Yeah, okay.
It's clear.
How about that? Can you tell where the teacher is and where the can you tell where the teacher is?
No.
No, we can differentiate.
You cannot,
No.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So this is a typical Socratic and Platonic teaching class where anybody can come up with a question and anybody can answer, and then somebody else can ask. This is what Socrates has been doing over the past two classes with us, right?
Yes.
Yes.
This is called the Socratic method. Okay, so as you can see, Plato's views on knowledge may also explain why he gives us or gives such a prominent role to Socrates' method of question and answer. Socrates does not try to impart. Impart means to give his opinions to the other characters by delivering a lecture like I am doing. Instead, his questions encourage them to think about the issues for themselves. Right? And Socrates stresses the fact that they cannot proceed from one question to another unless they have understood and agreed to each step in the argument. So Plato's views on knowledge might explain why he chose to write dialogues rather than essays. He could have written a book and you could have taken the book, read it on your own, and read his opinions. By writing a dialogue, Plato, like Socrates, avoids simply presenting us with his opinions, but instead encourages us to reflect on the questions raised by his characters. Okay. And we come to why Plato rejects tradition. I think it's now more clearer than ever. Why? Because of course, by Plato, of course, we mean Socrates, and by Socrates, we mean Plato, because Socrates is the mouthpiece of Plato, lisan halu, yeah. He represents Plato after all. So Plato rejects tradition, and we now make the connection between the claim that knowledge involves understanding something for yourself and the claim that reason rather than tradition is the proper source of moral beliefs. So again, the whole thing is about having the knowledge which would involve understanding something. So when you inherit beliefs, whether those beliefs are moral or otherwise, those beliefs are part of the tradition. Why you would not accept them? Because they are not based on you understanding things for yourself, and they are also not based on reason or the power of reason, your mind. So according to Plato, traditional beliefs, even if they are true, are merely second-hand opinions, and they wouldn't amount to knowledge according to him. Again, we come to the Socratic method, the thing that we spoke about. Remember the format of the class, the traditional format that I'm adopting now, where I give everything and you receive everything. And the Socratic method, where you don't have rows anymore. You don't have people in front of the teacher receiving. No, you have this Socratic method where everybody is engaged in question making and answer giving. So from the records, the historical records, we know that Socrates never claimed that he is a teacher, and that never presented himself as a teacher. And even Plato, when he presented him in his dialogues, he never said that he was a teacher with traditional teaching rules. When I say a teacher, you normally have in mind this idea of lectures and books. No. According to Plato and Socrates, there is obviously more to teaching than just imparting or giving information or expertise. So as you can see, Socrates' method is another form or another way of teaching. And it has had such a profound influence on the theory and practice of education. And some schools and universities are using this method as we speak. So the basic idea about this process of learning would be that learning begins from the student's own beliefs and experience. And the role of the teacher is not to impart or give information, but to engage students in critical discussion, encouraging them to inquire into the issues for themselves. Would you afford that? If we do that, you would, you know, call us crazy or something, right? Can you imagine? We're done. Do you have any questions?
Yes, doctor, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the conversation in the last of chapter will be with us for the quiz?
What conversation? You mean those?
Yes, after
So
the
these are the dialogues themselves.
So it's not important?
It's based, I mean, this is what we're basing our discussion on. This is what we call the primary source. So this is a translation of Plato's dialogues. Okay, so what we've been doing is that we were explaining them. Okay, so you don't have to read them.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. We have time for one more question, if you guys have any.
Excuse me, Ahmed.
Yes. Yeah, Dr. Ahmed.
Yes. I think the Greek philosophers had applied what we call it now the brainstorming or thinking by stimulating our minds to think by asking questions. This is a type of education. It's very useful, especially in these days while we learn through online, and you know what's the difference between the virtual classes and the real classes. We have sometimes to ask question and trying to find the answer sometimes maybe before coming to the lecture.
Absolutely. So I would tweak it a little bit, and I'm going to say that brainstorming started with them, and we are following their what do they call their lead. They started it, and we are copying them. So they invented all those mind relevant techniques and styles. Their starting point, like you aptly said, would be to use the mind. Okay, and as you can see here, the mind is a tool. We're using the mind as a tool through which we can check whether the information that we process is correct or wrong, whether it makes sense or not.
Excuse me?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ahmed.
When I was an employee at the National Commercial Bank, they had a program. They call it teaching the teachers or training the trainers.
Yeah, yes.
Tell them how they can tell their employees or improve their thinking or performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Again, it's not about traditional ways of teaching where you have a teacher giving everything and you have students receiving everything. No, we have now reversal of rules where, and this is actually what we sometimes do when we ask people to conduct workshops where the teacher would be a student and the student would be a teacher. We don't have those rigid rules anymore. Any other insights before we call it a night?
Yes, doctor.
Okay, go ahead.
You said that Socrates didn't represent himself as a teacher. So he's not a philosopher, right? And we can depend on his opinions or perspectives.
No, I mean of course he's a philosopher, and philosophy is not about teaching people things. It's about allowing you to understand and process things on your own. It's about enabling you. It's about enabling your power of reasoning. Philosophers do not claim that they are teachers. Okay, we take whatever conclusions they came out with and present them to you, we as teachers, but they never claim that they are teachers. They are more or less like enablers. They enable you on the different levels using the tool and the power of reason, your mind. Okay. Okay, so with this item and on this note, we come to the end of tonight's class. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Thank you to you.
Welcome.